Welcome to Objections with Stan Willis. I'm not Stan Willis. This is Stan D. Willis giving the D to all our listeners. What's the D stand for, Demetrius?
What the hell are you talking about?
Isn't that your middle name? Isn't it Stan D. Willis?
C. Stanley Willis.
But Demetrius would sound like,
It would be.
for our listeners.
It would be. Okay, I guess if I had a middle name that started with D, I would want it to be Marvelous.
You mean like you'd want it to be really cool? Or do you mean you'd want the actual name to be Marvelous?
Marvelous would be my name.
My daughter goes to school with a kid
Does
named
that start
Marvelous,
with a
and
D?
she is not marvelous.
Does this start with a D?
Yeah. Well, now I feel bad.
Why do
Stan
you feel bad?
Cornelia Willis. How about that?
C stands for
Deceased.
The C stands for really cool.
DC stands for really cool.
No, the C in my name stands for really cool.
Oh, well. I just thought
It should be RC, but
I just thought the new slogan would be, giving the D to everybody. But we won't do that.
given the T difference.
Hey, speaking of get fucked over.
What the heck is he talking about?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So I have a question because you're a lawyer. I'm also a lawyer. The non-compete issue got brought up because there's a bill that was just introduced, but as we talked off air, there's an older bill about non-competes. Can you kind of address, first of all, what a non-compete includes?
Essentially, it's more than just a non-compete. Usually in a typical employment agreement, especially in areas where there are intellectual properties involved, like research labs and science-based things, places in the automotive industry and things like that. Places where people are coming across things that are private. I mean, the Coca-Cola recipe was one of these big trade secrets. Anytime those things are around, and then even more and more in areas where people just don't want you to go set up shop next door after they teach you how to do their business. You have an employment agreement that has basically a non-compete clause, which a non-compete clause says that for a period of time after you terminate your employment, regardless of whether you're fired or laid off or you walk out, that you can't compete in the same industry with the business that you're leaving. And usually that's within a certain radius of that business, or if they have multiple places within a certain radius of any of those outlets. Then they typically will also include what's called a non-solicitation clause, which says you can't go solicit their customers for a period of time afterward. And then there's usually also a part where you can't take their employees. You can't solicit their employees to leave for a period of time. So you have all of those things, and then typically it includes working for a competitor. So you can't start your own business, but you also can't work for a competitor, right?
So it's really fair to the person signing it.
Well, I mean, you negotiate it going in, and sometimes it's fair, and sometimes it's not fair. And it really just depends on what it is. A lot of times they've been found to be so like the restrictions in a non-compete, at least in Ohio is a right to work state. So in Ohio, the non-compete clause has to be reasonable in its scope, in time, and in area, right? So, and there also needs to be something that is a protectable asset, client list, or customer list. A certain mechanism or a way of doing things, a certain way of production. They also try to do this in industries like, I mean, as you know, you were in the radio industry, and they try to impose these in that industry, mostly because they're trying to Mostly because they're trying to protect their sales force, right? I mean, they're trying to say, well, these people are advertising on our radio station. If you leave and go to a different radio station, then we want to keep that customer. So in that case, it's about protecting revenue streams.
Well, let me give you an example because I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask you first, are you for non-competes or against? So I want you to answer this two ways.
Okay.
You as Stan, but you separately, you as a business owner. Because I think those are two different ways to look at it.
Right.
But answer it as the business owner first. Do you like non-competes?
Well, I'm an attorney, so attorneys aren't. Yeah. Oh, good Lord.
Do you like how quickly went? I'm an attorney. I just had to I don't give a shit. Go ahead.
It's just, so I'm an attorney. So lawyers, a non-compete from a law firm against a lawyer is unenforceable. It's been found to be unenforceable because the way the courts look at that is, as a lawyer, I can't limit my client's choice of representation. The client should have the right to choose who they want. And if they want that attorney, I can't have an agreement with that attorney that prevents that relationship.
Got it.
So I'm not allowed to limit that. So in my world, I can't really have those. Now, as a business owner, would I like to have some kind of protection? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we work really hard to get clients in. We have a way of doing things that may or may not be something that anybody else does. But if we bring a lawyer in from the time they're a pup and we train them for 5 or 6 years, the last thing that you really want is for them to go open up shop next door.
Right. You mean to open their own practice versus go to somebody else's, or
even go to somebody else, because then they're going to want to take some of their clients with them, right, and things like that. And in law, this has been pretty much litigated and taken care of, and we all kind of understand what the playing field is, and I don't worry about it that much. We work really hard to keep our employees happy so they don't want to leave. So we don't give them incentive to go do that. That doesn't mean that no one ever leaves. And then if somebody leaves, we do what the Supreme Court has said we're supposed to do.
Shoot
when
them.
They leave. No.
Oh, sorry.
So I guess, but if I'm a person, I guess so. In my business, which is service-based business, I can see that there would be some benefit to being able to say, well, I don't want them to leave with half of my client base, put me out of business and go start. That's what you worry about as a business owner, right? But the bigger issue is, let's say that my business isn't this. Let's say that I invented a new way, a new type of lighting, and I have a patent on it, right? I have this process for developing all that stuff, and I certainly don't want someone in that situation to go next door and start selling my thing.
Because you have to teach them, because you can't do it alone. So you bring in 10 people and then they go, I know how to do this, and they leave. And I get that. That's your intellectual property.
Right. So I want to not only protect my intellectual property, but I want to protect my process, and I want to protect the time period where I have the sole rights to sell this thing.
Right.
I don't want these guys going out and taking their clients and either buying and reselling or whatever. I don't want them doing that. So certainly in that kind of a situation, certainly I don't want them going out and competing right next door or within close proximity with my clients. If you're a business that comes up with a new way of doing something that nobody else can repeat, you don't want people walking out and doing that.
Well, let me give the flip side of this, because everything you said on both sides is awesome. I'm going to give you a real world like how the media did it. So when I first got into media in 1998, there were no non-competes. So here's what happened. Stan starts at the country radio station. You're right out of school, whatever it is. We're going to pay you $20,000. But you've been there for 90 days. And so another state, the classic rock station would say, we've got an opening. Somebody left that these accounts. So this list would bill $500,000. Well, at the time, that's worth $65,000.
Right.
So then they're going to interview you, the $20,000 guy. So now you've moved up. Well, you've been there 6 months and a $90,000 list. Everything is the list is all the clients on it and what they bill. So what was happening is people that had no experience could make $90,000 to $100,000 in a year and a half, not because they were any good. It's because, we know that guy's name and that lady's name or whatever.
Right.
So when they got to the top of this pyramid, those people didn't know shit about advertising or marketing.
Right.
They were just handed the accounts.
Right.
So then they said, we're going to have to put non-competes in here. So there'll be 90-day non-competes because like what you said, I can't take my clients with me and any of that other stuff. So it was kind of a way to protect yourself so you had time to get to the client base that person was talking to. Then as time wore on, when my example was when I went to leave, these non-competes, they kept revising and revising and revising. And you know this from reading these contracts, it's always going to protect the employer.
Oh, yeah.
There was nothing. So you had to sign these. So when I first got into radio, you could make 18% commission, which doesn't sound like a lot. But if you're billing $1 million, you're making $180,000 gross, right?
Right.
Well, what they started doing was the companies, as they were making less money, were changing the commission. So it went from 18 to 15 to 11 to 10. Today, some of these stations are at 4% commission. Now you have to do 4 times the amount of work to make the same money. So I had a buddy that was a lawyer, Scott, and his wife happened to work with me, and she was getting out of the business because she didn't want to sign this. Because once you sign it, you also agree to the commission rate. So there's no negotiating, none of that. And I just happened to be at his house, and I said, can you read this? And he looks and he goes, there's no way out of this. You'll lose your job, which I was okay with, unless you sign it. And I said, there's nothing else. And he goes, yeah, you could start your own company, but what are you going to do? And I'm like,
that's a good idea.
So I said, I'm going to start an agency because there's nothing in it to prevent me from taking my clients with me, which is what I did. 1 week after I'm gone, new non-competes come in that also cover agency. Right. So you can't start your own company. Right. You can't go anywhere else. And they're a year long. I think those are negative towards, in both cases, it's negative towards the person that's working there because there's really no incentive because now you sign this thing and you're trapped. And anytime they want to change the rate that they pay you as a commission salesperson, you have to sign it, right? There's no get around. But for the company, you have a person that doesn't want to be there, but they can still fire them. Do you see what I mean? For the person that's signing, and I'm not saying there's a wrong or right. I'm just giving you to see people that are still there 15 years later that have hated it 20 years ago, but they can't go anywhere. I think it limits the talent pool because,
well, certainly it limits talent pool, and it's a very protectionist. I mean, it's a defensive measure on behalf of the people who are putting them in place because they don't want to have more competition or open competition. They want to have they're trying to protect what they have. In some of that might just be. In some sense, a bad business model that's spread throughout an industry. That might be part of it.
It's the worst business model, the media.
As an employee, your option is don't sign it. But
I want to stop you because
what the courts will say, what the courts have said is, a lot depends on what it takes to get there. So what is kind of unfortunate is the courts will tend to say something like sales is sales, right? If you have a highly technical form of sales, like if you're a medical salesperson, then they're more likely to, like if a medical salesperson has a non-compete, they're more likely to narrowly construe that than they are for sales where you don't have some specific kind of knowledge that you have to gain that starts limiting your available options, right? So so courts will say, well, if you can sell cars, you can sell tractors. If you can sell tractors, you can sell, because essentially it's just
you're selling a motorized thing.
Yeah, you learn about your product, right? And then you go and you sit in a sales room and you do it. So with what they will look at with the non-competes is they'll say, okay, well, this person has to be able to make a living. Is this preventing that person from making a living? My suspicion is that, like with radio, if you're a radio salesperson and say you're making $60,000 a year with your sales, if you tried to combat that and say it's a year-long non-compete and you can't approach their customers and you can't go to work for a competitor and you can't start your own agency that's going to be competitive with them, then the courts will probably say, go find a job selling something else. I mean,
but that's what they do.
What they would look at though is they'll say, okay, is the area reasonable? So is this a non-compete that says you can't compete anywhere in the continental United States when you have a radio station that won't even reach the outside of Columbus?
Right.
They'll say, well, that's ridiculous. You don't need that. Or if the non-compete says you can't compete with us for the next 10 years, the court will say, well, that's probably too much. I mean, a year or two.
But isn't this a right to work state?
It is a right to work state, yes.
Wait, for people listening on the podcast, we're in Columbus, Ohio, fast food capital of the nation. But
place where you can get lots of big gulps.
That was not a plug for a big gulp if you're watching.
It's not illegal in Ohio to drink yourself into oblivion like it is in New York.
He just did like the Wayne's World thing. You know what I mean? Where we would never sell out, But
don't be wrong. We will sell out in a heartbeat.
Oh God! if somebody will sponsor the show for $13 and we split it, we will do anything. Brought to you by the Lion's Den. Listen, what I found funny is there are workarounds. So one of the best stories ever is I'm not going to say her name, but there was a well-known personality on Channel 4,
right?
And she wanted to go to Channel 10.
Uh-huh.
And so what they did was, you have a 1-year non-compete. Great. We're going to pay you and you work in the mailroom.
Right.
And that's what they did, except for in that year that they paid her, I want to say 40% more than the other station. They unknowingly brought someone else in during the year. So this person makes anchor money to be the PSA, public service announcement person.
Right.
So when it's Martin Luther King Day and she's on the thing, but she never got back on TV other than that, but still makes anchor money. So she didn't lose out.
Right.
But the same company that did that hired a guy that they wanted to be their sales manager, or he was a sales manager, and they put him in the mailroom.
Right.
When I would call his house during the day, he was home.
Right.
They paid him to sit at home. So there are workarounds. I mean,
but it's.
But don't you think it's silly to go through all that?
It kind of is, and it kind of isn't. And like I said, I understand from both sides, right? But if you're, let's say you're Disney, right, and you have a $40 million contract with Johnny Depp to do a series of pirate movies.
Let's say, just in case it's a wild idea.
Right. But the last thing you want is for Johnny Depp to get pissed and run over to Paramount and say, you know what, I'll do these movies with you. Right.
Right.
Because it's your idea, it's your investment, and so all you're doing is protecting your investment. So when it starts coming to on-air personalities, to stars, to music contracts and stuff like that, with the amount of money that's involved, it's a different playing field, right?
Right.
I mean, because when you think about like when Johnny Depp is negotiating that contract, they want Johnny Depp. He's on equal footing with Disney, right?
Right.
If I'm negotiating with Disney, I'm not close. Right.
Well, I don't know about that. If they've heard this show, you're better than Johnny Depp.
It doesn't matter if I'm better. It's who's going to draw more at the box office, right?
Obviously you, but go on.
Okay. But so if they're negotiating with me, it's a different playing field. And so there's a different level of what's fair and not fair. So when you come down, so in my mind, there's a big difference between negotiating with on-air personalities at a TV station or radio station and negotiating with salespeople.
Okay.
So you see what I'm saying?
That's a great point.
Because I think that the on-air personalities are on more of a level footing than the salespeople are, right? The sales guy who's going to make 20 grand.
That is a great point, but this is just because we're running out of time, because I want you to clarify this. If you're on the news or radio or whatever, like you are in the entertainment, if you're on air, if you're talking or getting paid to do that versus a salesperson, if you were negotiating a contract for somebody, I mean, I would do it, but I'm too busy. If you were negotiating that and you saw this non-compete,
and you would go to jail, but that's okay.
It doesn't matter why, okay? It just means I can't do it. We know a show that they were a morning show and they got fired.
Right.
Their non-compete still covers this town for, I think, 6 months.
Right.
After that period, you're killing them off. Right. And you know you're killing them off. They have no recourse.
To some level, yeah.
Because by that point, people aren't going to go, oh, it's June, we'll just bring them in. You're taking away their audience that was with them that would have been loyal. The chances of them picking that up, because it's local, not a national show.
Right.
Now you're going to say, hey, we brought you back 6 months later to another station. Let's see if it works. If it doesn't, they sign another non-compete and they can still get fired.
Right.
Do you look at that and say those are worth it? Or does getting rid of the non-compete doesn't make it better?
So in a hypothetical situation where people get fired and it wasn't a wrongful termination, I have really a hard time being sympathetic. If that makes sense. Now, if it's a termination that because if it comes down to like for instance with your example of a morning show, the morning show people really want to take the show in this direction, the station wants to take the show in this direction, so the station says we're going to terminate you. In that situation, I don't feel like that the non-compete is an overly fair thing, because they didn't do anything necessarily wrong other than disagree on an artistic level with the way their show should be.
But see, that's what I think is the biggest difference. Is if you're a creative, because like Johnny Depp and all, you're creating something.
Right.
When you're just doing transactional business, it's like holding an accountant and say, no, you can't get another accounting job. That sales job is a little bit more important, but you can stop them. If they are really that good, you can stop them from advancing in their career. And that's what that bill is supposed to get rid of.
Well, if the bill makes non-competes illegal, attorneys will find a way to protect what needs to be protected. Because that's our job.
It is our job.
But I guess my point with going with the on-air personalities, if somebody is being discharged for something that's a clear dischargeable offense, and you have a non-compete, my thought process kind of goes, "Well, you should have been smarter than that." And for that, I mean, so you ask at the beginning, do I like non-competes? Not really. Ideally you would have a complete capitalistic society where everybody's free to go do what they want to do. The problem is that anytime you introduce bad intention, anytime you introduce evil into the system, it screws it up. And I see non-competes as if they're limited and used properly, it's kind of a way to keep small business people from being taken advantage of. But when you start putting that in the hands of larger corporations, it becomes more of an aggressive tool or to actually force people into situations that maybe they don't want to be.
What's the Tolkien quote? Evil cannot create. I think that might be incomplete. Whenever you let corporations decide something, he was talking about in terms of them writing or producing something. It's the same thing. If you're going to limit somebody's life,
Right.
It would make me, I would never sign a non-compete again.
Well, the classic example of corporate overreach is the railroads back in around the turn of the century.
All the live long day.
When they were paying people in railroad script that you could only spend at the railroad store. So yeah, we're paying you 1,000 railroad dollars a day. It's like the money in Monopoly, right?
My dad still works for the railroad. We have all kinds of nice hats. We got to wrap this up.
Okay.
But thank you for being on your own show.
Thank you.
I never got to really do that like he's a guest on his own show. You've been listening to Railroad Johnny. Objections with Stan Willis. See you next week.